This conference will now be recorded.
All right, folks, why don't we go ahead and jump into our Water Availability Task Force, Flood Task Force meeting today. We are going to have some changes to the agenda as you see it here, so we can go through that. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Tracy Kozloff from the Division of Water Resources. I believe Megan Holcomb is also here on the phone from the Colorado Water Conservation Board, but I'm going to be, hi Megan, acting as, I guess, our MC today, with Ben Wade sort of running the show as usual. I think the change that we're going to make to the agenda is, I'm trying to keep up with my emails for how this is changing. We're going to have Andrea, Terry, and Chris. What was their topic, Ben, if you don't mind? They're going to present first. And so
Yeah.
that...
Right. Yeah, so we're going to get the statewide Lidar acquisition update is going to kick it off with that. And then Terry's going to give us a floodplain mapping program update. And then Chris Sturm will be providing the wildfire recovery update.
Okay, so we'll do that. And then, oh, I just lost my agenda. And then we'll follow the agenda as it was written there in front of us. Megan, I'm struggling to remember how you've done introductions in the past. I think maybe what you've done is ask folks to write in the chat who they are and who they're representing. So I'll go ahead and suggest that people do write in the chat who they are, who they're representing here on our call today, rather than doing a round robin and having folks introduce themselves. I do have one announcement, more of a question really from DWR that I wanted to ask of the group in this part of our agenda. And that is that at DWR, we produce the SWASI, the Surface Water Supply Index, that is normally part of the NRCS presentation where we're... I'll ask if everybody can mute their microphones, please. The Surface Water Supply Index is usually presented as one of the slides in the NRCS presentation, and at this time of year, it combines both the streamflow forecast as well as reservoir storage in one number. And at this point, that number is displayed as a number between negative 4.16 when we're in very dry conditions and a positive 4.16 when we're in very wet conditions. And that's a similar data range for some of the other projects, like some of the other drought indicators. But we're considering moving from that negative 4.16 to positive 4.16 scale. We're looking at moving that to presenting the data just in percentiles. So you no longer have a negative number when we're in drought or dry conditions. You would just have something less than the 50th percentile, for instance. So I want to ask if anybody has concerns if the state were to switch to a percentile scale for the SWASI. I don't think anyone's using that data in any type of secondary calculation. I think that maybe would be problematic if anybody was, but so if anybody has concerns about the state making that switch with the SWASI to percentiles, if you could maybe speak up now or send me an email later, I'd appreciate it.
Hey, Tracy, this is Becky.
Hi, Becky.
I just wanted to let you know that because the U.S. Drought Monitor relies on percentile rankings for its categories, that might actually make it a useful indicator for us when giving recommendations if it was in the percentile category.
Okay.
It would be an easier translation for us.
Good. Got it. Okay. Good. Thank you, Becky. Anybody else have any feedback or thoughts about that? Definitely want to know if anyone's using that number currently in a secondary calculation, and so if we make that change, that would be difficult. Okay. Does anyone else have any announcements they want to share with the group or updates? All right. With that, why don't we jump into our first presentation? Sorry, Ben, right now I can't see the agenda. I'll pull it up off of the website. Oh, here it is. We're going to start then with the statewide Lidar acquisition update.
Hello, this is Marta Blanco Castano with CWCB. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, hear you good. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I forgot to ask for permissions previous to this meeting, but is there any way I could share my screen?
Yeah, we should be able to do that. I imagine
Okay.
Ben is working on that in the background right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to do this one. All right, so hopefully people can see my screen. I'll go very briefly over the updated Lidar data acquisition map. So this is the current status. Green shows where we have available data. Blue is where we are currently in the process of acquiring data, and it will be available later this year, so that by early next year or late this year, we will have the entire state of Colorado covered with quality level 2 or higher Lidar data products. So that's very exciting. We will be receiving this Northwest DRCOG or Denver metro area data, and the San Luis Valley, which also includes this western part of San Miguel and Erie and Pitkin County, hopefully in the summer or fall. And then the eastern plains over here, Washington, Yuma, Kit Carson, Cheyenne, Crowley, and North Kiowa, will hopefully be late this year or early next year. So again, we're very excited to, be able to cover the entire state pretty soon, which will, of course, allow us to continue conducting hazard mapping projects and providing high resolution quality topographic data for various purposes. So if anybody has any questions, you're always welcome to call or email me. And so I wanted to also cover very briefly our ColoradoHazardMapping.com website. This is where we, the flood mapping program within CWCB, kind of post information, communicate information, have different resources and FAQs and that kind of thing related to our program, and the National Flood Insurance Program that we partner with FEMA for, so that we're running our program here. The different components. So I'll let Terry cover the LOMR part, but I wanted to briefly update on the LIDAR request. So this is something that I try to update at least once a month, and it just shows it's pretty much the same thing as this map, except it doesn't show the ongoing acquisitions. It just shows what we have on file in approved, complete status. So you'll notice that we have a couple areas here. This is the Cameron Peak and then the East Troublesome Fire that's showing green in this map, but they're not available. They're not showing in here, and that's because those data sets were provided in preliminary format for post-wildfire recovery and resilience and mitigation efforts that we got special approval from USGS to be able to use for that purpose. But for the most part, everything else is, our areas where we have full, complete, approved, effective LiDAR data products for. So this is a resource that people can come and use to figure out, okay, so this was acquired in 2016, this was in 2019, 2018, and then people can see what we have. And then if they want to request LiDAR, they can go to this link and either fill out a form or figure out, depending on how soon they need it, they can either reach out to us directly or be able to download it themselves through the OIT's FTP site. But the cool thing about this LiDAR data portal is that we are actively working on getting a public-facing, LiDAR data download site that any user can pull data from on their own at their own convenience based on everything that we have. So that's going to be coming in the next few weeks. We're very excited because we think it's going to be very user-friendly and have all the functionality that most people will need. And so be on the lookout for more information on that soon. And I think with that, unless anybody has any questions, I think I'll turn it over to Terry.
Thank you. Are there any questions? It's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so this is Terry Fade, and is it possible for me to share my screen?
Yes, let's get that going for you.
Thank you. So part of our exciting news is that we are starting our Colorado Water Conservation Board Letter of Map Revision Review Partners program. And this is under the Federal Emergency Management Agency Cooperating Technical Partner Initiative. And what this will mean is that we'll be reviewing and processing map revision submittals for changes to flood insurance rate maps and for FEMA. This is going to start for us on March 22nd, which is next Monday. And this is kind of what the process looks like. There's an effective firm or flood insurance rate map, then a proposed project will come in, and ultimately it ends up looking like this revision that would be shown on the map. So that's the typical process. We're able to do this because we're a cooperating technical partner with FEMA, and we also have applied for and been awarded an annual grant so that we can implement this program. And we'll be doing this in the state of Colorado outside of the Mile High Flood District. Right now, the Mile High Flood District does the letter map revision processing for inside the Denver metro area. So the benefits to us are that we can leverage the CWCB and FEMA information, and it brings it to our local partnerships and helps us strengthen those local relationships. We have the knowledge of the flood hazard mapping studies and different projects that are going on throughout the state that we can coordinate the map revision process with. And we're able to provide then a local access and resources and assistance to our communities that are looking to do map revisions or requesters for that. And it also should help streamline the revision process, since we can do things that are locally, and then some of the information requests and things can be more informal based on because we have the working relationships with those our staff. So we also have a map site where it's one of our map sites that Marta showed you on our Colorado flood hazard mapping our Colorado Hazard Mapping website. And we're working on this. It's still kind of in progress, but it provides different information regarding map revision requests. If people are looking at where they would provide things, we're showing a map that is anything within the Denver metro area goes to the Mile High Flood District, and anything outside of that would go to us. We have references to just general information on is a fee required, that kind of thing. And then we have additional resources that provide like information on the Endangered Species Act, which is something that has to have compliance if you're doing a conditional letter of map revision in the state. So there are a lot of resources here. We're making this available to our communities, and we'll be modifying it and updating it as we go along. And now I'll turn it back over to Marta to give quick updates on our other mapping projects that we have going on. Thank you.
Can I share my screen again? I'm so sorry. Awesome, thank you. So back to the ColoradoHazardMapping.com website. Some of you may be familiar with our projects and our resources, but I would say the most notable one related to our flood hazard assessment and mapping projects would be the flood hazard tab. So if anybody's curious on what existing projects we have, what resources and data sets are available, this would be a good starting point. If you're interested in looking something up by county, I'm going to use Larimer as an example just because we have an active project there that's moving through the prelim process. There's this sort of map interface where data sets will be showing as we scroll through these tabs up here. Information will be shown here on the left, and then there's a address locator up here so that one is able to input a specific point of interest or address and kind of zoom into that automatically. But the cool thing about this website is that we've kind of packaged everything by geography into one site per county, so that one is able to come and look at the status of things, the progression of where things will be moving forward. We also have kind of a list of previous meetings or outreach efforts and, links to, for example, one meeting that we had lately was this March 9th public meeting. So as you see the hyperlink, if you can open this in a new tab, it'll take you to a download of the presentation or any other related information to that particular event. So we kind of have compiled everything by county or by project into each of these sites. So it's pretty cool. You can also visualize where we've had some of these outreach efforts. And as you scroll down or kind of move this way, you will see additional information related to the project. This is related to the Lidar and what topographic data was used to develop the existing floodplain mapping products, survey information with a breakdown of the categories. And then as you move through, again, we have hydrology information, we have hydraulics, and these are links to the primary models that were produced for these areas that you see here. The floodplain mapping, this will compare the preliminary, if available, with the effective data set from the National Flood Hazard Layer. So it's allows for users to quickly kind of see differences in the extent and delineations of the floodplains. Although to look at the specific changes since last flood insurance rate map, or CSLF, there's a tab for that too. So red shows what has changed in terms of an increase. Green is a decrease since the effective product was published. And again, as you move through, there are different data sets. You can kind of, kind of point, and it'll give you the value at the cell that you're pointing to. And again, we have additional products over here. So this is pretty cool, for figuring out what's out there, what we've published and what we're working on for each county. Let's see. So let's go back to this flood hazard tab. We have the homeowner report. So if you put in an address, um, it'll give you a sort of summary report for that particular location based on the effective data set and the preliminary data set, as well as some summary statistics over here, which one can export as a PDF. So it's pretty user friendly and easy to pull some statistics pretty quickly without having to maybe peruse through all those tabs simultaneously. And then if you're interested in the CHAMP, the Colorado Hazard Mapping project post 2013 flooding, you can find information at this link. General information just takes the user to our, a myriad of resources that we've been posting in, recent times regarding, with some YouTube videos and tutorials on how to read different pieces of information, and if you have GIS or don't have GIS, there are different versions for those, we call them non-regulatory flood risk products. Some basic information on what a public meeting usually involves, how to use the site, just general videos over here too. And then again, some resources on this site that we're constantly working to expand upon. And then, we have some, this is where one can come in and put in several keywords. And for example, I don't know, just put Boulder, and then you can kind of filter by anything that is available, whether a presentation, meeting minutes, any other, documents related to that particular keyword, in this case, a county or a city of Boulder, hydraulic models, any other data sets. So it's pretty cool. And then we have a mapping interface where you can kind of view different layers together or separately. Our frequently asked questions, community rating system resources, and as Terry mentioned, the Loma Review Program site. So we're constantly working to expand this website, and we think we have a lot of good resources and information out here. But as always, if any questions come up or issues, feel free to reach out. We're working to improve things as we go, so your feedback is appreciated. And I think with that, I am done with this part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions related to flood hazard mapping and the information just presented? That was very helpful. All right, folks. So I'm sorry, I'm getting a couple of chats here. All right. So for those who are just joining us, we've had some folks join as the presentations have been going on. I will paste again into the chat a link to our agenda. We do have one change from the published agenda. We're going to have Chris go ahead and do the, oh, thank you, Ben, for putting it up. We're going to have Chris go ahead with the wildfire recovery update because he had a conflict come up in his schedule. So we're going to move the wildfire recovery update to the next item. And after that, I believe we can go on with our agenda as printed. So Chris, if you could take it away, that'd be great.
Sure thing. And I do not have a presentation, so I'll just share my camera here. Good morning, everyone. And thanks for accommodating me out of order. This is one of those cases of having a doodle poll floating out there, and then all of a sudden a meeting is scheduled in a block that is no longer open. So I appreciate the flexibility. Wildfire recovery update. As we all know, we had a lot of really big fires in 2020, and the CWCB has been working to help folks recover from fires for, over a decade. And we have a new strategy, which I'm very excited about. I've been trying to implement for a number of years, and the timing was right this year to do it. So the CWCB and our technical assistance team, led by Ingenuity Engineering Solutions and Jeff Sickles, have been helping fire recovery stakeholders by getting out early and developing hydrologic and hydraulic models. We'll just call those H&H models. I think most folks are familiar with that term. So that we can model the pre-fire scenario with runoff and post-fire, given the burn severity information and how that changes our flow regimes and runoff dynamics. And then we've been working with the stakeholders to gather data layers for values at risk. These are often houses, other structures, road infrastructure, water infrastructure, culverts, things like that, to put those on our maps, and then to come up with priority rankings that help the stakeholders decide where they need to get out in the field to visit for further information. And then usually the first money on scene to help support recovery is from the NRCS Emergency Watershed Protection Program. And so in the process of the EWP program is to develop damage survey reports where they look at values at risk and determine if protections are justified through cost-benefit analysis. And the feedback we've been getting is that it's incredibly helpful to have these H&H models that show where risk is so that they can be more efficient with their DSR processes. Now, we anticipate that we'll be seeing other projects outside of the EWP program through FEMA-funded and state-funded sources. The CWCB just received, or is about to receive, $4 million for the Watershed Restoration Program to support fire recovery efforts. This is through Senate Bill 21054, which just recently passed. I'm not sure that the governor's signed it yet, but that is pending. And so our technical assistance team is going to be available to continue to work with the stakeholders to help them identify projects and develop scopes of work, get into design, do design review, and all the way into implementation to do some oversight and help on that as well. So we're pretty excited about this strategy. In the past, we would just send money through our grant programs and really watch local communities struggle to figure out an efficient process to get them towards implementation. As we all know, this is not business as usual, and it can be pretty stressful with the timelines that folks are looking at. So rather than do that, we show up with the technical assistance first now and help folks put together good prioritization strategies that lead to implementation. So project types that we're looking at out of the gate are going to be likely flood warning systems and possibly aerial mulching. There's still some debate on whether or not the Forest Service is going to allow that, but I think that the Cameron Peak Fire folks are getting some good traction with that. And that will lead to more of the midterm recovery projects. After we see some runoff events, we usually need to do some channel stabilization and culvert upgrading and other projects in that realm. At this point, I think I will see if Kevin Houck has anything to add to it, and I will take questions.
Chris, this is Kevin. I think I'm good. That was a great explanation. So thank you.
Okay, and I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
Chris, I might add, this is Megan Holcomb, CWCB. I put this in the chat, but either for you, Chris, or for everyone on the call, a reminder that we will have Vaughn Jones next month at the Water Availability Task Force meeting in April, and he is preparing a wildfire outlook for the governor, I believe the week before our meeting, and he's open if there's anyone on this call or from our staff that are interested in specific trends or information that we would like him to present on for this group. You're welcome to share that with me directly, and I can relay that with Vaughn, or if there's just anything specific you would hope that he might touch on next month, let me know.
Thank you, Megan. And that cues up the next little bit that I have, that our longer term vision for our support is to be more proactive in that we're working with communities that want to do pre-fire mitigation planning. And I think it's going to be incredibly valuable to have a lot of this data that we need for our H&H models on the front end built into our plans. There's no reason why we can't assemble information on the values at risk, bringing in the Lidar that we need. And that was a great update, Marta. The Lidar is an essential first piece when we're building these models. And we can even, if we want, and the local stakeholders desire, can start making some assumptions about burn severity and do some modeling in advance of a fire to give us an idea of how flow regimes might change and what values at risk are the highest priorities, which can then lead to pre-fire, pre-flood mitigation and actual implementation. And I've got all sorts of ideas about multi-objective projects that can help not only mitigate impacts from fires that haven't happened, but improve ecological function and water supply. So hopefully that's where we'll get to after we get beyond fire recovery. I think we're going to be playing catch up for a while. But it's a lot easier to prevent disasters than it is to respond to them. And that's all I have. Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Let me just give another awkward pause, as Megan would say, to see if anybody else has questions for Chris about CWCB's wildfire recovery program. Okay, thanks again, Chris, for the update. All right, let's jump back to our agenda. We'll move on to report from the state climatologist. I'm guessing, Becky Bollinger, this is going to be you today?
Yes, it is.
Great, thank you so much.
Hold on. Are you seeing my screen? Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yep,
Yes.
that looks perfect. Thanks.
All right. So I'm sure you all are waiting with bated breath for this actually really good news presentation. I am so happy to be able to present this month and not be all doom and gloom. So I'll take cookies or beer for anybody who is happy about that too. We're going to recap what's happened year to date before we start talking about the current conditions. This picture was taken by my colleague, Alistair, as he hiked to our campus weather station on Sunday in Fort Collins. Here's where our statewide average temperature ranks ended up for February. Ranked 25th coldest. And most notably, we had that very deep cold event that happened on the Eastern Plains, which helped contribute to this below average month. Looking back through the rest of this water year, you'll see that we've had several warmer than average months. And we haven't actually had a below average month for statewide temperature since October 2019. We're missing some of our maps that we normally get from a resource called Westwide Drought Tracker. So I decided to take that NOAA statewide ranking that we looked at and break it down by county here on the map for you. So again, you can see that statewide that rank is 25th coldest with an anomaly almost 3 degrees below average. And this is how it breaks down on the counties. You can see west of the divide and across the San Luis Valley that mostly temperatures were closer to normal. And then as you move east along the Front Range Mountains, they were just a little bit colder than normal. And then on the Eastern Plains, their far Eastern Plains, north and south, that they were much below normal in that bottom 10th percentile ranking. This is expanding out and looking at the entire winter. So December, January, February, and a little bit more of a mixed bag. But when you take it all and average it together for the entire state, it shows up as 61st warmest with a slight anomaly warmer than average. And we have some counties that are in western Colorado, west of the Divide, and Castilla County down there that show up with a little bit warmer than average anomalies. Southeast Colorado showing up with cooler than average anomalies. And a lot of the counties across the state just showing up right around that near normal range for the winter. What have things looked like over the past month since we started March? This is a few days behind, but from March 1st through March 15th, we've actually had some warmer than average temperatures. A few isolated spots that have been cooler than average, but mostly warmer than average, and especially the further east you go, a lot warmer than average. So we'll switch over to precipitation. And precipitation rank for February was kind of right around middle of the road. So you could either look at it as 69th driest or 59th wettest. So not really notable in either direction, very close to that average range. And this was the first month where we haven't really been in that below average or, you know, higher ranking on the drier side. The higher ranking was actually on the wetter side. So nothing real notable since October, though, in terms of what our ranking for precipitation has been. I will say that you can go back in that ranking and look to see what the ranks are for different time periods. And the April 2020 through February 2021 period, which is an 11-month period, is the driest on record for that 11-month period. Breaking it down by county for the month of February, we can see a little bit of the wetter anomalies showing up in northern Colorado, the northern mountain counties, and down along the Front Range counties there, and a little bit of drier anomalies on the eastern plains, which is not too big of a deal because this is really their driest time of year. And also across the San Juan Mountains, a little bit drier than average, which is not good because they should be getting a lot in February. This is expanding it out over the winter period of December, January, February, and almost all of western Colorado has shown up a little bit drier than average. The rank for the entire state for the winter is 40th driest, with a almost half-inch anomaly below normal there. But some of those Front Range counties there we can see showing up slightly wetter than average, and closer to average in most of the other counties around. What have we seen since the beginning of the month? March, we've had a very surprising wet period, and totally against what we were expecting to see based on the CPC outlook, the Climate Prediction Center outlook for the month. This is not the pattern we were expecting, so it is quite welcome. Those darker greens go into 1 inch or more of moisture since the beginning of the month. And then you get into that blue, that's 2 to 4 inches, and a couple isolated spots of 4 to 5 inches, which you would expect to see isolated over the highest elevations, but actually pop up over lower elevations. So much wetter pattern east of the Divide, and even where it's in the green and lighter green in southeast Colorado, that is about average or above average for the entire month of March. So good news. What you see in the San Luis Valley there, a little bit drier, but not too concerning. They don't actually get that much precip for this time of year. But west of the Divide, those greens and dark greens, much preferable to see as all dark green with blues in there. We do want to see a much more active pattern west of the divide, but very good news east of the divide. Oh, see, perfect. I'll show you what March average precipitation looks like. You can go see these maps directly on our website with the link at the bottom. So this one shows what we would typically expect in March. The purple colors there are areas where we typically get 3 inches or more of moisture in the month of March. So pretty much all of the higher elevations, that's what we want to see. And so now you know why it's not quite as impressive looking west of the divide on what we've actually seen this March. But east of the divide, as you start going down in elevation, you go from about 2 inches in the little bit higher elevations, and then down into the plains and valleys, you can see anywhere from 3/4 of an inch to just a little bit over an inch. So now you can see why 2 to 4 inches throughout this area is a really big deal for this time of year. I'm going to break down and look at some individual sites around our state. So our first one is Grand Lake, and I should have seen if we could pick another station, because I'm not sure exactly how much its precipitation was impacted by the fact that it was near the East Troublesome Fire location for the beginning of the water year. So you can see that blank area in the temperature map on the upper left was where they stopped reporting. I don't think they got any precipitation, but I don't know if their precipitation since then has been impacted by that. But all the maps we're going to be showing for the next few slides show daily temperature graphs on the upper left-hand corner and the precipitation accumulation in the lower right-hand corner. So upper left-hand corner, the little bars to the triangles show what the daily high temperature and the daily low temperature were starting at the beginning of the water year. And then the dark blue and dark red lines are what is average, and then you can see thin red lines and thin blue lines showing what the range is for those high temperatures and low temperatures throughout time. So we've had a lot of variability at Grand Lake, and in the records there you can see that they've been breaking more warm records than cold records since the beginning of this water year. Looking at the precipitation graph, Grand Lake is showing up as well below average for this time of year. That's the black line accumulating up, shows the accumulation since the beginning of the water year, with the dashed line showing what is average. So keeping up with average, you'd want to be at that dashed line. All the little skinny squiggly lines after, in this example, March 13th, are showing a projection of what are the range of possibilities to be expected from this point forward. If every year started with this accumulation from March 13th and March forward, what would the end of our water year look like? And based on where they're at now, you can see that it would be a below average year by the end of the water year. Shift west over to Grand Junction. Looking at the temperatures, we've had our fair share of above average temperatures and below average temperatures throughout the water year. You can clearly see some of the extreme cold that happened in late October, and a really much warmer than average period here in early March. And they've actually broken more cold records than warm records there, interestingly enough. Looking at their precipitation accumulation map, they are currently at 54% of average, so about a 1.5 inch deficit for the water year. And if you follow all the historic ranges of possibilities, it is looking more likely that they would also end the water year below average. Montrose is just a little bit southeast of Grand Junction. They have not updated recently, so I won't spend long on this. Their update stopped in mid-February, and I'm not sure why. I'll have to check in on that. But when it did stop, their precipitation was a little bit below average. Go down to southwest Colorado at Mesa Verde National Park. Again, we've had a lot of variability, but mostly we've had lots of periods of warmer than average temperatures in this area since the beginning of the water year. You can see some of these cold snaps that they've had, but that's just really temporary until they bounce right back up to above average. Looking at their water year accumulation for precipitation, they're at 59% of average. Right now, they should be at over 9 inches, and they're not quite at 5.5 inches. So that's a pretty big deficit. And as you can see, it means they are increasingly likely to not get average precipitation for the water year. Shifting down into the Rio Grande Valley or the San Luis Valley and looking at the Alamosa Station, we see a lot more variability in the temperatures, a lot of times of below average here. They were well above average for the beginning of the water year, but I think we have regulated that a little bit more throughout the rest of the water year. In looking at the water year accumulation of precipitation, we see how beneficial that early event that occurred in late October really helped boost them above average, and they've been able to stay slightly above average since that event and going into March. So they are currently at 109% of average. So really it's anybody's bet where they might end off by the end of the water year, but so far looking good. Okay, we'll shift up and go over to Pueblo. We can see very clearly that February cold snap right here when we look at the temperatures. Some of those low temperatures getting down to -15 to -20. They've broken lots of records this water year so far, including 7 record cold high temperatures and 6 record cold low temperatures. But also they've had their warm periods too. Lots of variability there. Shifting over to the precipitation accumulation, they are hovering right near average, 94% of average for the water year, so not too shabby there. Into southeast Colorado at Walsh, we can also very clearly see the recent cold snap they had in mid-February, well below -20 degrees. They've also broken quite a few warm records and cold records. And looking at precipitation, they were a little bit below average before this most recent event, and that's taken them right over to 96% of average. So they're right at 4 inches, right where they should be for this time of year. I'm gonna go north to Burlington. This one's my favorite one to look at right now. Go back to Burlington. So looking at the temperatures, we can see the cold snaps that happened in late October, and the most recent one. Look how cold those highs are, right near 0 degrees from that February cold snap. And lots of times though of warmer than average. So quite some volatility in the temperature over time at Burlington. Looking at the water year precipitation accumulation so far, they went from a little bit below average before this event and then shot right up. They got almost 3 inches of moisture from this one storm event. Now, normally they have to go from October 1st through February 19th to get 3 inches of moisture. They got it in 3 days. And so now they are at 142% of average. And most of the plume is showing up around average or above average. So that is really good to see. And hopefully that water sticks there a little bit longer. Going up north to Joel's neighborhood in Akron. Also good news, but not quite as extreme as what we saw in Burlington. But with the temperature looking pretty similar, where we've had those cold snaps and warmer than average periods, a little bit below average on the precipitation until we hit this most recent snow event, and that popped them up to 116% of average for the water year. Finally, looking at Boulder, and we see a pretty similar story in terms of a lot of variability in the temperatures, although they've broken more cold records than warm records for the water year. And then looking at the precipitation, they were a little bit below average, but this most recent event took them to 98% of average. I'm going to shift over and look at the standardized precipitation index across the state on different timescales. For those unfamiliar, standardized precipitation index gives you an idea of how anomalously wet or dry the precipitation over an entire time period has been for all these stations across the state. So if they are positive, they're in that wet anomaly category. If they're gray, they're in a near normal range. And then if they are in that yellow, orange, red colors, which match up with the US Drought Monitor categories, those are our drier SPIs that are negative. So over the last 30 days, and I do want to make clear that this goes to March 15th. So the product is a couple of days behind, which could mean that some of these would show a little bit more of a boost in those wet colors on the east side of the state. But 30 days out, what a welcome sight to see with all these greens and blues and purples on the eastern side of our state, particularly these purples. Wet anomalies from 2 to 3 on the SPI scale is quite impressive to see for any time of year, but this time of year as well. West of the divide, it's not quite as good of news. It is not looking as bad as it has looked before, but we still do have some of those negative SPIs in our higher elevations in the northern mountains, down into the Gunnison Basin, and then down to the San Juan Mountains. Extending out and looking to the 60 days, which goes back to mid-January. This map really doesn't look too bad. We've got a lot of wet SPIs east of the divide, closer to normal SPIs as we look throughout southwest Colorado, western Colorado, with just a few negative SPIs around the Steamboat area and the Blue River area just south of the Colorado River there. 120 days, that's the first hint we get that this is more of a long-term drought that we're in. We still have the wet SPIs on east of the divide, and a lot of the wet SPIs that we are going to see in the eastern half of the state are largely going to be due to just what happened with this last event. Even though it's a long-term SPI, that's how powerful this recent event was. West of the divide, we start to see that drying out, particularly when you look in northwest Colorado. Extending out to the 9-month SPI, this is when things start to look a little bit more depressing. Those reds and maroons are D3 to D4 level dryness according to the U.S. Drought Monitor. And that is why when we look at the U.S. Drought Monitor map, we see a lot of the D3 and D4 categories in Western Colorado still. So when we extend that SPI back to June, we're still seeing a lot of dryness throughout Western Colorado, our mountains into Southwest Colorado. Things have been looking a little bit better in the Rio Grande Basin and the San Luis Valley. And as you can see, our recent precip event has helped to lessen the negative SPI values that show up in Eastern Colorado. One final note I do want to make is that this point that's in Kiowa County, it's a maroon color over Eads in Kiowa County in southeast Colorado. They have not reported their precipitation yet for March, so that is very likely to not be that D4 level once they add in their March precipitation. Extending out to the 12-month a little bit more, a 9-month is definitely one of the worst case scenarios, but 12-month here we can still see that we do have a long-term drought situation on our hands for almost the entire state. So let's talk about that drought and look at some drought monitor maps. Before I shift to that, I wanted to hold on to the good news just a little bit longer. The left picture is from our campus weather station that Alistair hiked to on Sunday to get that picture. And then the picture on the right is my CocoRa's rain gauge for when I woke up on Sunday morning, looked out in the backyard, that's what I saw. Here's a look at the national map that was just released this morning from the U.S. Drought Monitor. So yellow colors, as a reminder, are not drought categories. It is an abnormally dry category, D0. The drought categories start with D1 through D4. And so in our state, you can see that we have a little bit of everything from D0 to D4. Let's go ahead and zoom in. Again, this follows along pretty well with what we saw in the SPI maps, where the worst of our drought categories are in Western Colorado. We still have significant areas of D4. About 15% of our state has D4, and one of the most critical areas to have that is right there along the Colorado River. And then one of the areas that's been most frequently hit with this is down near the Four Corners, Southwest Colorado. So still about 38 to 39% of the state has a D3 or D4 category, so those reds and maroons. And 95% of our state is still in a drought category. Now, when we look just, I think even just a month ago, 100% of our state had drought categories. So those little yellow dots that we see where it's D0, those are non-drought categories, and that's helped to make our state not 100% in drought right now. Here's where we've seen the improvements since last week. So what this map shows is wherever we had a 1 category or 2 category improvement in the drought monitor, you would get that green color. So again, there's what it looks like, and everywhere where you see that green means it improved from 1 category. So where you see that D2, for example, that's just south of the metro area, and then in eastern Adams and Arapahoe, that was D3 last week. Now it's D2. Denver metro area north was D2. Now it's D1. So we've had quite the widespread improvement from this snow event that we've had, basically from the Continental Divide, a little bit spilling west of that into the Colorado headwaters, and also going into North Park. But then mostly from there, it's just been east of that and across the Front Range cities and over across the Eastern Plains, and then a little bit down south in the Sangre de Cristos, we've had improvements. Biggest note are the darker greens, which is a 2-category improvement. And that is something that we don't often see. The drought monitor really reserves that for really wet, anomalously wet events that occur. So our last 2-category improvement that we had occurred in after the September 2013 floods, just to show you how rare it is to do that. So the fact that we have these 2-category improvements is a big deal. The first is over Larimer County, the higher elevations of Larimer County that got 4 to 5 inches of moisture just above average for just this event. Or 4 to 5 inches of moisture, they're now 4 to 6 inches above average for the month, and even are 2 to 4 inches above average for the entire water year in the higher elevations of Larimer County. And across the Eastern Plains, we talked about Burlington, and you can see that area and surrounding areas also with that 2-category improvement going from a D3 to a D1. These are the class changes that we've seen since the beginning of the calendar year. And the good news is that we have seen almost nothing but improvement since the beginning of the calendar year across much of the state. So that is something to be celebrated, even though we are still in the midst of this drought. All right, we'll do a quick outlook to see where things are going to go from here. Thankfully, we see more color on the precipitation map when we look over the next 7 days and what's going to happen precipitation-wise. The map on the left shows the precipitation accumulations that are forecasted for the next 7 days, starting this morning and going through next Thursday morning. So the dark green is above a 1/4 inch. So majority of the state looks to get at least 1/4 of an inch over the next week. Blue areas look to get closer to 3/4 of an inch to over an inch of moisture. And that's all good news. Unfortunately, Four Corners looks to be missing out. If you look to the right, what Russ has created here is an anomaly map where he takes the next 7-day forecast precipitation and compares that to what is average for this time of year. So you can see if the precipitation forecast is above average or below average. Really helpful product. And if you go to the link at the bottom, you'll be able to see those updated regularly. So where there are greens, it will be an above average week for moisture. Pretty much, again, everywhere east of the Continental Divide can expect above average moisture over the next week. A little bit closer to average in locations west of the Divide with some isolated above average, and then below average around the Four Corners. The 8 to 14 day outlook, which covers the period from March 25th to March 31st, so the end of March, is showing that we are more likely to be below average in temperatures and a very slight leaning towards drier than average, but that's really probably pretty open for what could happen precipitation wise. But you can expect it is more likely that we will be colder than average for the end of the month. This is expanding out to the seasonal outlook. This was just released this morning. This covers the April, May, June time period. The map on the left shows likelihood for temperature being above normal or below normal. So for most of the country, there is a leaning towards above normal temperatures for the April, May, June time period. And that darker red that's above, that covers most of Colorado, doesn't mean more above normal. It just means there's more confidence that we will have above normal temperatures for that time period. And going over to the right is the outlook for precipitation for the April, May, June time period. And unfortunately, they have a bullseye of below normal. So they have some fairly high confidence that we will have below normal precipitation for the April, May, June time period. That all being said, they had a bullseye of below normal over us for the month of March, and that is definitely not what happened. So these are not good maps to see, but the good news is they can be wrong. How about the El Nino forecast? Well, currently we are in a La Nina. We've been in the La Nina for the entire winter. And the map or the graph on the left shows the probability of La Nina or neutral or El Nino conditions for each season moving forward. So if you look at the forecast for the March, April, May time period, we still have about a 60% chance that we will stay in a La Nina. But as we move into the late spring and into the summer, the chances of staying in the La Nina decrease and the chances of shifting into neutral conditions increase. So it is more likely that we will not be in an El Nino or La Nina into the summer. We will be in neutral conditions. This doesn't really mean a lot for summer because there's not really a strong signal either way what happens in the summer, regardless of what we're in. On the right are all the models that predict the El Nino region. And if it's a negative number prediction below -0.5, that would be a La Nina. And if it's above +0.5, that would be an El Nino. So you can see where we're firmly planted in the La Nina category for January and into February and even in March. But as that forecast plume goes out, it weakens a bit and goes where the sea surface temperature anomalies are still negative, but they're not in that La Nina category anymore. And then you have some wild, crazy models that say, oh, we're going to go into a really strong La Nina or a really strong El Nino. Not likely. Most of the models are converging towards just that neutral category. So La Nina, what do we typically expect? Well, for March, April, and May on the left, these are the risks of getting a dry extreme or a wet extreme during a La Nina. So where you see the reds, oranges, and yellows are areas that are at higher risk for dry extremes during a La Nina, and the greens are areas that are at higher risk for wet extremes for the March, April, May time period. La Nina, we typically expect to see wetter over the northern Rockies and across to the Pacific Northwest, and wetter over the Great Lakes region in the Ohio River Valley. And then to the south, we expect that risk for dry extremes to increase. The map on the right shows what has actually happened this March in terms of departure from average precipitation. And I've taken that and then I've drawn that on the map on the left where we've had below average departures in the maroon circles and above average departures in the blue circle. And where we are, we would expect more dry extremes, especially east of the divide for this time of year with a La Nina, but that is not what we've gotten. So this is just a reminder that while La Nina and El Nino can give us a little bit of information of what patterns are more likely and where we lean, it's not a perfect relationship, and you can turn that completely on its side like we did this March. All right, a few summary points before I wrap this up. We have been experiencing a warmer and drier pattern through this winter, just slightly. So why have we seen improvements on the drought monitor map? Well, because conditions really are not as severe as they were in the fall and the summer. Our recent snowstorm definitely boosted moisture east of the divide, which is great. But west of the divide, as you can see on the drought monitor map, this was not a drought buster. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that from Brian or Carl when they give the snowpack updates. The seasonal outlook shows confidence that our area is going to be warmer than average for April, May, June, and there is a tilt towards higher chances of drier than average for that period. But again, March proves it is really hard to forecast beyond 2 weeks. So keep your fingers crossed that we don't get that warm and dry spring that is forecast. That is all I have. You can email me with any additional questions. This presentation I will be giving to Ben, but will also be located in our archive on our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Becky. Who's got questions for Becky?
This is Swithin. Becky, do you have a feel for the drought monitor? Was the entirety of the weekend snowstorm included in this week's deliberations on that, or would we expect to see some further improvement next week based on last weekend's storm?
It is possible that we could see further improvements, and part of that is going to be looking at some of our products that are slower to update and might not have been updated in time, such as soil moisture. So I think the surface response and hydrologic response will be a little bit slower and may give us a little bit more of an idea if we can make further improvements. And if the forecast pans out, we are still going to get continued precipitation on top of that, which could also help with further improvements.
Okay, thanks.
And those improvements would likely go further south from what I've seen, what I've seen in precipitation since that event and with the forecast.
All right, folks, feel free. Any other questions for Becky? All right, Becky.
I might jump in. Hi, sorry to delay. This is Joel from NIDIS. Becky, the longer range forecasts for La Nina, looking out, the ENSO forecast that you showed, the IRI ones, when we look out as far as autumn, it's suggesting that odds are favoring a second La Nina. I know that's pretty far out, but what do you think of that? Is that are we getting ready for a second La Nina this autumn and winter?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty consistent in showing odds that favor that second La Nina, which is not really that rare. A second La Nina would definitely not be a huge surprise, although I will say that the models at this time of year are very poor. They have very poor skill at forecasting what is going to happen after the summer. So while they have been consistent with that forecast, I wouldn't put a lot of stock in it just yet.
Thanks, Becky.
Yeah.
What other questions, folks? All right. Thank you, Becky. Really
You're
appreciate.
welcome, and bravo on the awkward pause.
It's, sometimes it just takes a little longer for people to unmute and
It
formulate
does.
their questions. So, yeah,
Thanks.
thank you. All right, now let's turn it over to NRCS. I think we've got Brian here to present. Wonderful. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, Tracy, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Becky, for that presentation. I'm going to share my screen here and start from the beginning. A few quick things here. One, I'm having a little trouble this morning keeping my throat clear, so forgive me if I take a quick pause. Hopefully it won't be too awkward of a pause. I'll try and warn you guys before I do pause. And the reason I bring that up is because when I first started the meeting this morning, I again had the same technical issues that I had last month where I couldn't hear anybody, but I could speak. So if that does happen, all I got to do is close the browser and reopen it, and I should be back within 30 seconds or so. So that's that. I'm going to go a little bit fast here this morning because I added a few slides to address the most recent storm. So if I'm going too fast through some of the typical slides, please speak up, stop me, and I'll pause on some of those slides. But I wanted to make sure to cover the effects of the most recent storm this past weekend. And in doing that, I thought I'd get right into it from the beginning. This is output of snow water equivalent for all of the major basins in Colorado on March 10th, which is pre-storm. You can see where snowpack was standing by these bold numbers in each of the basins. Snowpack was near normal here in the Arc and in the Rio Grande, the upper Rio Grande, and then slightly to below normal in many of the rest of the basins, again, prior to the storm. Post-storm, we see, much as Becky mentioned, that the Sangres, the Arc, of course, the upper Rio Grande, and the South Platte benefited the most from this most recent storm this weekend, whereas the Western Slope just didn't see that, which is typical for some of these wraparound storms. So we did see an improvement. The most marked improvement was in the South Platte, where there was a 15% improvement in snowpack over just that few-day storm. And of course, it was very welcome. Statewide, the improvement was considerable. It was a good one, but it was not out of the realm of normal. The 2019 storms that we saw through that March 10th through March 16th period was actually more considerable statewide than what we saw out of this storm this year. So that's just the way, the snow fell. However, if you look at the South Platte, for example, where we did see that 15% improvement, the snowpack improvement there was a new record for that period. It's not atypical to see, some of these storms come in for these shorter time frames and break our record. And that, to put it in perspective, a record for the South Platte there, I think, is we only have a 40-year period of record. So to see the most snow through a 6-day period for a single basin it happens, but it's, of course, not something that happens frequently, but it does happen every once in a while. So just trying to help put that in context there. Okay, going back to the typical set of slides for the presentation, looking at the Yampa White snowpack, did see a boost here over these last 7 days from the storm. Snowpack is near 93% of normal, according to this graphic, but you can see that we still are below normal. But the storms that we got there did help out. Here's a map presentation of that. Oh no. Oh, sorry, I forgot. In a few places I put where some of the changes from snowpack accumulation were on the larger side, I decided to use last month's map, the map presented at last month's presentation, and then include this month's presentation, or this month's map, excuse me, to show that change. So going back again, you can see that there was a 9% improvement in the Yampa White, and in the North Platte, we saw a 12% improvement in snowpack from last month's presentation on February 12th to March 17th, which is yesterday. Looking at the precipitation change, February was a pretty good month for us, precipitation and snowpack wise, at least in the northern basins. We'll see that here as we go along. 151% of average precipitation in the combined Yampa White, and then March so far is 117% of normal. And then here is the monthly, or month to date, I should say, precipitation accumulation for the combined Yampa White and North Platte basins. Looking at the individual sites, you can see that there's kind of a smattering. Some of the sites are above normal, and another bunch are below normal, which is relatively, again, normal trend to see some sites above and some sites below for this time of year, because while February is an increasingly important month for precipitation, and I say increasingly, looking back to January, the typical total accumulation is in, I think it's like the inch to inch or 2-inch range. So when you only get a ½ inch, you get to see some of these numbers in here, especially since this is through the first part of March. And then if you happen to get 1.5 inches or 2 inches, you start to see these 300% of normal numbers. Again, we're dealing with small numbers, so slightly larger increments with over top of small numbers, talking about it in terms of dividing a big number by a small number, can make big percents of normals. Precipitation for the combined Yampa White basin did see a bump, a little bit more better than normal. You can see this line, the black line, this year's line is a little bit steeper than the normal lines, the yellow and the purple line. But again, we are well below normal, and I think, again, it's worth pointing out that you can see the black line is below the minimum line here, which goes to show that we were record low for year-to-date precipitation back in January and very early February. Fortunately, those storms that we saw in early February have helped, but we still are relatively close to flirting with record low precipitation in the combined Yampa White Basin, and we are at 83% of normal according to this graphic. Streamflow forecasts, which were published based on March 1 data, show that forecasts are anticipated to be below normal, or I should say streamflows are anticipated to be below normal across the entire North Platte and the Yampa White basins. Reservoir Storage last month, I think we're missing Yamcolo. However, we got it back this month. Fortunately, Reservoir Storage is above normal at this point in time for those two reservoirs combined across the basin, I should say. Okay, moving on south into the Colorado, Upper Colorado River Basin in Colorado. The effects of the most recent snowstorm that we had here were relatively minimal, not quite the lowest in the state. The Colorado Basin only saw a 5% bump in snowpack. Again, comparing the slope of this line, which is slope is improvement, compared to the slope of this line here for these same time frames, does show that we received above normal snowpack accumulation for this time frame, but it wasn't anything breaking the bank, much as Becky mentioned. Here right now, snowpack is 90% of normal according to this tool, this graphic in the Upper Colorado. And here, again, I'm doing the last month number, which was 83% of normal, to 90% of normal. So this actually shows a 7% improvement from last month to this month, whereas this storm showed a 5% improvement. And you can see that snowpack again is relatively scattered. We're not seeing, except for here on the northern part of the basin where snowpack is relatively near normal, we're seeing slightly below normals numbers, I think on the Mesa and here along Summit County and I-70. Upper Colorado Basin precipitation was 117% of normal in February, and fortunately through March has been 127% of normal so far. And then looking at month-to-date precipitation, again, we've got a smattering. Things get a little bit more consistent here. It looks like the storm did benefit the southern portion, or I should call the southern mountains of the Upper Colorado Basin, whereas some of these sites here bordering on the Yampa White did not quite see as much precipitation. And then year-to-date precipitation here in the Colorado, again, not too far from the minimum for year-to-date. Upper Colorado is still at 82% of normal year-to-date precipitation, so relatively low. Across the basin, streamflow forecast, again, are below normal for April to July 31st runoff. So I'll get into here in a little bit exactly what these the most recent storm has done and how it may affect those streamflow forecasts. I'm going to go into that here at the very end of the presentation, but I'm going to say right now that just with a 5% boost out of this one storm, I'm not too hopeful. I don't believe we have a very high chance that we're going to see a big increase in the streamflow outlooks for this spring. Now, of course, that is dependent on future precipitation, and as Becky mentioned, that could change things. It does look like there is some more precipitation on the horizon, but if it will be above normal is the question. And then here, combined reservoir storage across the Upper Colorado Basin is just above normal, as you can see in the bar, the light green bar graph on the right. Okay, here looking at reservoir storage over the long-term trend, again, the black line being normal, you can see that we have trended upward slightly as in the combined reservoirs for the Colorado Basin, so slightly above normal there for the total storage in the Colorado. All right, moving on into the South Platte, where the effects of this most recent storm were most significant. Snowpack here is now, according to this graphic and another one, at 100% of normal. You can see that this boost that we got here, the slope of this line is much steeper than the slope of this line, and that is the improvement that we got over just from this storm. So we got a really good boost out of this storm. Again, this is not this month's graphic. This is last month's. We were at 86% of normal. And now, as of, well, yesterday when I updated this graphic, we're at 100% according to this tool as well on Snowpack. So over the last month and change, we've seen a 14% improvement in Snowpack, thanks in large part to this most recent storm. February precipitation was 142% of normal in the South Platte, and March so far has been 153% of normal. Here, looking at all the individual snow tells in the basin, you can see that it looks like every single site received normal or well above normal precipitation in the beginning part of March through yesterday morning. And again, here, looking at it in terms of precipitation, year-to-date precipitation, we got a good bump. However, precipitation is only at 95% of normal because some of those drier spells that we've had in the beginning of the year and also arguably throughout January. Looking at those streamflow forecasts, they're a little bit better here in the South Platte than some of the basins we've already looked at, but still they are all below normal because of the dry antecedent streamflows and the dry soil moisture conditions that we're seeing. And this is one of the biggest factors that we face across the state, is those dry soils and those low base flows that we're seeing. That is something that is a larger hurdle to overcome. Despite getting or having normal snowpack now and getting this most recent storm, it's going to take a fair amount of precipitation and snowpack accumulation to overcome these soil moisture and low base flow deficits that we're seeing right now. Combined reservoir storage in the South Platte is slightly below normal at this point, but still pretty close to normal. And again, reflected here, you can see in the long-term trend, we're still coming off one of the lower periods that we've had in the last decade for reservoir storage at the end of last year, but we'll have to see where our cooperators on the reservoir side and the water management side, what they have in terms of reservoir storage and what their plans are for management. Moving into the Gunnison, snowpack did see a boost here, again, not as significant as the South Platte, but snowpack now sits at 87% of normal, according to that graphic. And then again here, last month it was 79% of normal on February 12th or February 13th when I presented. And then this month, as of yesterday, snowpack is at 87% of normal. So going back again, we see an 8% improvement over the last month and change in the Gunnison. Precipitation for the month of February was 94% of normal, and March to date is 106% of normal. You can still, as I was mentioning earlier, and as Becky has been mentioning, and is definitely something for all of us to keep in our mind, that year-to-date precipitation number across the state is below where we should be. So we should be here, and we are here. You can see this deficit that we have to make up just in this year's precipitation, let alone the dry summer that we had last year that is leading to a lot of those very dry soils and low base flows across the state. Month-to-date precipitation is, you can see the individual sites here. It's been a little bit better along the Grand Mesa, but in the Gunnison, March has been relatively good thanks to that most recent storm. And then here, year-to-date precipitation in the Gunnison, not really flirting with minimum, as it has been in the Yampa White and in the Colorado for some parts of the year, but still is relatively low. Have some gains to make up. Excuse me, I'm going to clear my throat real quick. All right. Sorry about that. Again, streamflow of prospects across the entire Gunnison are relatively low, below normal. You can see some of these forecasts here on the south side of the Grand Mesa are a little bit lower than the rest. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And again, I don't think we're going to see much of a boost from this storm in those streamflow forecasts coming up here on April 1. Reservoir storage in the combined Gunnison for the combined reservoirs in the Gunnison is just above 80% of normal. And we'll get some of those solid numbers here at the end of the presentation for the statewide map. And then you can see that reservoir storage is below normal and is close, or I shouldn't say close to some of those late 2018 numbers, but is relatively low compared to what we saw in 2019 and 2020. Early 2020. Okay, moving into the southwest corner of the state, snowpack is at 83% of normal, not flirting anywhere near the minimum snowpack values that we have seen before, but still below normal, making up a little bit of ground. You can see that we have a few weeks until the typical snowpack peak, which is in early April. About April 10th is when it typically happens. It can vary a fair amount, but we have about another 3 weeks before that happens to try and make up some ground. And we can make up ground after that peak typically happens, but we need cold temperatures to do that. So I did not put in the last month's snowpack map here. So this is this month's yesterday's observation for snow water equivalent or snowpack. 83% of normal according to this graphic is where the combined San Miguel, Dolores, San Juan basins are. And here's one of the reasons why it continues to remain low there compared to the rest of the state. February precipitation was 66% of normal, and March to date is 86% of normal. Again, looking at this deficit that we have to overcome. You can see here March to date precipitation is relatively normal, but with the typical amount of precipitation accumulation between an inch and a half through the first half of March, it doesn't take too much to measure up in this case. And if we do wind up having below normal precipitation, these numbers can dip down by the end of the month. Year-to-date precipitation in the combined San Miguel, Dolores, San Juan basins is 69% of normal. And you can see that we got a little bump here, but nowhere near what we saw in the east-facing ranges, mountain ranges, I should say. Streamflow forecast as of March 1 were below to well below normal across the majority of the combined basins, as you can see here. Combined reservoir storage for the San Miguel de Oro, San Dimas, San Juan is at 60% of normal, so a good bit below normal at this point. And I haven't talked to any providers down there, so I'm not sure if they're holding that number down in anticipation of runoff, or if there's any projects going on there right now. Maybe one of our providers can, or anybody can comment on that a little bit later. Here, long-term reservoir storage compared to some of the other reservoir droughts that we've had in the past. You can see that we're close to where we were in 2018 and 2017, but not quite as bad. Excuse me, I'm gonna clear my throat one more time. Sorry for that. Okay, so here's a little bit more of the brighter spots in the state are both the Upper Rio Grande and the Arkansas, and fortunately they have been running relatively normal to slightly above normal in the Upper Rio Grande, which has been atypical for, I don't know, the last half decade or maybe even more. Snowpack just has not been measuring up there just because it's been relatively dry. But fortunately this year it's been the bright spot, I would argue, in Colorado and in the Southwest or much of the country actually. The boost that was received from this most recent storm was beneficial, more so than it was in the San Miguel de Oro, San Dimas, San Juan basins. And it has kept us above normal. Right now, snowpack in the Upper Rio Grande is 100%, 106% of normal, according to both that graphic and this graphic here. The precipitation, the continued precipitation that we've continued to receive here along the Sangre de Cristos has really been beneficial in boosting the snowpack there. However, precipitation-wise, while we did have a below normal February at the 63% of normal, March has been above normal, but while snowpack has been above normal, precipitation is still below normal. And that's one of those things that's going to factor into those streamflow forecasts, as we'll see here in just a few slides. Again, month-to-date precipitation, you can see the Sangres have benefited from these most recent storms, whereas the western portion of the basin has not, and which is driving the March precipitation up a good bit to be above average here, but showing what I was alluding to earlier, year-to-date precipitation is 87% of normal in the entire Upper Rio Grande Basin. Now, looking at those streamflow forecasts, you saw that snowpack was above normal, but because of those dry soil conditions and the below normal precipitation both this year that I was just pointing out and the significantly dry conditions that we've had last year and even arguably in the year prior, are really weighing into these streamflow forecasts being below to arguably well below normal. For example, here 67% at Rio Grande 30-mile bridge. And I think there are some other streamflow forecasts that we don't have on here that we don't typically publish, but we keep an eye on that do show a lot of those low base flows and low soil moisture conditions. Combined reservoir storage for the end of February was a little bit above 70% of normal in the combined reservoirs in the Upper Rio Grande. So a fair amount of ground to make up here. And here you can see, of course, this below normal number being below the black line. Yeah. Okay, moving on to the last sub-basin in the state. The Arkansas, again, is one of those basins that's been one of the brighter spots in the state. Things did dry out a little bit in early March, but then we got the boost from the storm. But this basin, the Arkansas basin, has shown relatively near normal snowpack, even arguably better than the South Platte has shown for much of the year, the water year. But it has dried out over the last few weeks, with the exception of this most recent storm, which has again boosted the snowpack to just above normal at 102% of normal. Here is again a month-to-month, last month to this month comparison. Snowpack was at 94% prior to the storm, and at last month's presentation, and then again boosting up to 102% of normal after the storm, and for this month for total snow water equivalent in the basin. Again, you can see the Sangres have just been really getting some good, relatively good precipitation compared to the rest of the state throughout, well, this month and arguably throughout the year. February precipitation in the Arkansas was 104% of normal, and precipitation to date in March has been 150% of normal. And here you can see that month-to-date precipitation benefiting from the most recent storm. Year-to-date precipitation, again, here as is going along with the typical trend, is below normal, but here only slightly below normal at 93% in the Arkansas. And again, just those dry conditions that we've seen over the last year, dry soil moisture is playing into the stream flow prospects for this spring and summer, below to arguably well below normal at Grave Creek near West Cliff. Combined reservoir storage, again, between 70 and 60% of normal for the Arkansas River Basin. I'm not sure what the story is on these reservoirs missing. They were missing last month, and I don't know if they were missing the month before, but for the data that we do have, which does include John Martin, we are showing that reservoir storage is above 60 but below 70% of normal. And here you can see that downward trend that we've been seeing in reservoir storage in the Arkansas, mainly because of the dry base flows that we've been seeing, I believe. Okay, statewide. Again, here doing a last month presentation comparison to this month, you can see that statewide snowpack was at 84% of normal. Try and remember any basin numbers here as we transition to the next slide so you can compare. And then here you can see now statewide is 92 as of yesterday morning. Snowpack is 92% of normal. Again, the South Platte saw that big boost, now at 100%. The Arkansas and the Upper Rio Grande are slightly above normal. But over the next few days, we'll probably see these numbers drop because we are not receiving precipitation. Now, they won't drop significantly. They'll probably drop 1 or 2% a day, which is very typical for these short dry spells that we have to see numbers dip a little bit, 1 to 2%. Each day. Statewide Colorado snowpack is at 91% of normal. And you can see, compared to the South Platte or compared to the Arkansas River Basin, this line is nowhere near as steep as it was. We don't see the increment that we saw. So statewide, the effect of the most recent storm is not as significant as we saw in the Arkansas and the South Platte. February precipitation statewide was 106% of normal, and March was 124%. Month-to-date precip, you can see that where this storm really had effects here in the northern and eastern basins, and some of those eastern sites, hitting some of these sites a little further west on the western slope, but not as significant as we saw right along the Continental Divide. Statewide precip is only at 82% of normal as of yesterday morning. But as of this last storm, things are getting a little bit better. So hopefully this next storm that we see here, beginning part of next week, I think is what Becky was saying, or what I've seen in the forecast models, will provide another added boost. Again, comparing last month's year-to-date precipitation at 76% of normal, which is relatively low, to this month, this product shows 83% of normal, whereas the graph that I just showed you was 82%, very close, different ways of calculating it. But better here in the east, and then on the western slope, not quite as good, but still all below normal. Streamflow forecast as of March 1, again, I'll go into this here in these next in a few slides, actually, excuse me. Streamflow forecast not looking that great based on March 1 numbers. We'll have to see what the rest of the month does for precipitation if we can maintain those numbers, and you'll see what I'm talking about here in a little bit. Reservoir storage across all of the individual basins. Here's the actual numbers that we're seeing. Statewide, reservoir storage is 85% of normal. Better in the northern half of the state, and still trying to keep up in the southern half of the state. So here's one of the slides that I don't typically show, and these are our daily water supply guidance forecasts, and these are automatically run. They are not official, but what they help us do is give an idea of what some of the more recent storms have done in between each of the monthly forecast periods. So here on April 1, or actually they'll be published about April 7th, I think, this month, April 6th, if everything goes well, we'll see another yellow dot here for all the different exceedance forecasts here on April 1. And before we get to that point, we're trying to get an idea of what the most recent storms, what the most recent weather or lack of storms has done to the model guidance. So you can see the most recent storm. I'm pointing to the 50% as the most likely forecast for volumetric forecast from this point, or from whatever point we were forecasting. We did see a bump here at the South Platte, on the South Platte River at South Platte, Colorado. We did see a bump, but it's not getting us back to that period of record median or even the normal. Right, so we just saw a little bit of an improvement from this storm, and it's going to be dry here over the next few days. I would guess this line's probably going to dip a little bit in these dry conditions before we get that next storm. And the question is how much do we get in that next storm? Is it going to be significant enough to bump us up to the period of record median or the 1981 to 2010 normal? I would argue not. That's probably going to take a lot of precipitation to get us back to that norm. Again, we're battling the soil moisture conditions, the deficits, and the dry precip that we saw in the beginning of the year. And the reason I'm using the South Platte here, this example, and then also the Big Thompson, is because this is where we saw some of the most significant accumulations from this most recent storm. And we would assume that this bump that we see here across much of the rest of this forecast points, much of the rest of the state, are not going to be as significant as we're seeing here in these graphics. So here, the Big Thompson near Drake, we see a slightly larger improvement from this most recent storm. The trace, or what we were anticipating for runoff prior to this most recent storm, was better here at the Big Thompson, and we did get back to normal. But again, this is one of the more optimistic outlooks based on the conditions that we've been seeing. So I didn't get a chance to preview or look at all of the other daily guidance forecasts, but I would guess that the prospects for runoff are going to be lower than what we're seeing here at all of the other, at most of the other streamflow forecast points that we have. So finally, moving into the last few slides.
Hey Brian, this is Tracy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just thought that might be a good time for a pause. I've not ever seen you present these before. I know you said you don't normally, and I didn't actually know you guys had this information available, but I just thought some of the folks on the call might have a question for you considering these graphs. So
Yeah.
sorry, thank you for letting me interrupt you, and let's just give a pause and see if anyone does have questions about this piece.
Yeah, any time. Thank you, Tracy. And so while I'm here, you're bringing up a great point. These products are available on our webpage. You can look at this to get an idea of what the forecast may be doing between the official forecast points. Yeah, this is something, it's not, these forecasts are not quality controlled by humans. So again, there can be a fair amount of error there, but it does kind of give you an idea of what's happening. So yeah, I just thought I'd put that out there. And if you want, at the end of the presentation, I'm happy to show how to access this product. But if anybody does have any questions, please speak up. That way,
Yeah, I'd like if you would do that. I'd like if you could show us where people can access this. That would be helpful. If nothing else, maybe it's the link in the chat, or maybe it's more complicated than that. Either way. So
yeah,
folks,
how about I'll actually show it, and then I'll put a link to the landing page, and that way I can show people how to access it. It shouldn't take me more than 30 seconds or maybe a minute, if that's okay.
I think that's great. That'd be really a big help. All right, folks, any questions? Or Brian will continue on. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, and we'll probably have a little bit of time for questions at the very end too, if any come up in the last few slides here. So this is a great graphic because it shows the trend of reservoir storage in each of the basins and the state since the beginning of the year. Fortunately, in most of our basins, we're seeing a slight improvement, a slight increase in reservoir storage since the beginning of the water year on October 1. Here statewide, the improvement is small, but it is an improvement. And then here are the long-term trends. Statewide reservoir storage for the combined reservoirs in Colorado have dipped down and are comparable to the levels that we saw at the end of October 2018 and the beginning of 2019. So yeah, this is a little bit of a longer summary, but basically I'll summarize it. The best snowpack improvements from the most recent storm came in the South Platte and the Arkansas River Basin. The Colorado and the Yampa White, the Gunnison were basins that saw minimal, or I wouldn't call it minimal improvements, but they were the smallest improvements, 4 to 5% increase in snowpack percent of normal. Precipitation statewide has improved, but it was a slight improvement, not enough to overcome the precipitation deficits that we've seen over this year and in previous years. Reservoir storage did see a 2% increase since last month, up to 85% of normal statewide, and as most basins did, but we still have a ways to go to get back on reservoir storage. And streamflow forecast, I've reiterated it a number of times because it is so important, but those low base flows in the streams and the low soil moisture that we're seeing is really what's dragging down the streamflow prospects that we have. Even though in some locations we have near normal snowpack, we should still be anticipating below normal runoff conditions, even with the most recent storm that we've had. And that is all that I have. So if you have any questions, please. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm gonna maybe quietly move through the request that Tracy just had. But if you have any questions while I'm moving through it and posting the link, please go ahead and ask some questions.
And I did see, it looks like Carl posted the link in the chat, but still would be helpful if you want to show us, Brian.
Yeah, it is. Awesome, Carl. Thank you so much, man. That makes it so much easier. Okay, so here is our main landing page, and I will go to, so I think the link that Carl just provided is, yeah, the daily forecast, perfect. And if you have to go this way through the main page, you're welcome to do that. Let's see, where's those dailies? Daily water supply forecast graphs right here. And then there's a number of different ways to look at them. You can look at the forecast skill if you're interested in that, which is right here. However, I'm only going to show you how to get to the graphs that I was just showing you. You do have to scroll through. It's not just Colorado. This includes all of our daily water supply guidance forecasts across the Western United States. But here, for example, I will go to the best one that we were seeing today, the Big Thompson near Drake. You just click on that, and then here you get that daily guidance. And then if you want, go back and you can click on any one of them. And the list is a little bit long, but you can also look at it from by state. So basically, all of Colorado shows up here, and then the states it's organized by state here. So use the drop down on the right. And I will leave it at that. Any questions?
This is Becky. I do have a couple questions for you, Brian.
Yeah. Hey, Becky.
The first one is, when you go to the interactive snowpack graphs for the basin, and you can see the different lines, like the median line, why is it so often that the median peak is much higher than the median line during the peak time period?
That is pretty high. So I think everybody should be able to see my screen. I am showing one of those interactive charts.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm trying to remember exactly what the calculation process is, but as of right now, the median line uses a 7-day smoothing algorithm, or I shouldn't call it an algorithm, it's just a simple 7-day average that can tamp out a little bit of the noise, or if you call it noise, whereas this is literally the centroid, the median of the peaks. So we take all of the peak values and then create a median. Whereas here for the median line, we're not using the median peaks. We're using all of the values with the median, and then it's smoothed by that 7-day smoothing.
Okay. And that would make
So
sense because that's not necessarily the peak at that time for all the dates. So if you have different days that have peaks, that would make sense.
yeah, and this seems to be, this one that I just happened to bring up does seem to be a little bit bigger than I kind of remember them being. What's that, about 2.2 inches? But I kind of remember them being more in the inch and a half realm. But you know, some basins are going to have larger discrepancies than others. But yeah, that the smoothing, I think, begins to explain the majority of the discrepancy.
And when you show one that says we need 169% of average to get to normal peak, is it to get to that X median peak SWE?
I don't believe I know the answer to that. I have an inclination that it is actually to the smoothed peak. And are you talking about on the
Like on your static maps that you showed during your presentation, you would show a basin and it would say this basin needs 169 or whatever % of average to get to peak SWE.
Whoops, wrong way. Yes, so that is to the median line on that graph, which is technically and somewhat vastly different calculated from the line on this graph. Let me pull it up here.
Okay.
Yes, it is to the center line, the median line, not to the point peak. Whoops, went a little too far. Yes, that you're talking about this one right here.
Yes.
That is to get to this, to the median on this line, and the median is the purple line.
Okay.
Yeah, great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Becky.
Can you tell these Disney peoples to shut up?
There's some,
Idiot.
I was just going to ask, there's a dialogue going on between Russ and Carl in the chat, but I thought maybe we'd want to just have that out loud because other people might be interested in hearing more of a discussion about it. Do you see that, Brian, or Carl and Russ? You might want to we could all just talk about it.
I'm getting ready to pull it up. No, I did not have the chat up on my screen. They're based on.
So can you guys hear me?
Yeah, Carl.
Yeah, while you're pulling that up, I can just address it. Basically, Russ was asking about what our 5 different exceedance probabilities are based on. So you notice in all those plots Brian was showing, there's 5 different lines, and we commonly discuss the 50% chance of exceedance, and that's what's generally populated on our maps and what a lot of people talk about. But basically, we do produce 5 different forecasts that allow for consideration of the range of possibilities, primarily driven by future weather. So like the top purple line is our 10% exceedance probability. And that basically means there's only a 10% chance you would receive more stream flow than that. The green middle one, that's our 50% chance, kind of the quote most likely. And then the bottom one is a 90% exceedance. And I think part of Russ's question may be how in the legend there it says 1 in 10 and then 5 in 10, 9 in 10, where in other products we do discuss it as a 10% chance of exceedance, 50% chance, 90%. So a little bit different communication there. But those are basically using our regressions and based on you can think of it as the percentiles of observed stream flow in the past is where those exceedance probabilities come from. And the statistics go a little bit deeper, but hopefully that at least briefly addresses Russ's question. And obviously Brian or anyone feel free to add on, but hopefully that addresses the basic question.
Yeah, Carl hit it perfectly. The only thing I might add is, as Carl mentioned, it's mainly based on future precipitation. And let's say you had a magic crystal ball and you were 100% sure that we were going to have a wetter than normal spring or period from here, wetter than normal period from here through the rest of the forecast period, so to speak. You might say, okay, I know it's going to be wetter than normal. I would want to use this forecast as the total volumetric flow through this stream gauge. So, 3 in 10 opportunities or 3 in 10 situations are wetter than this potential outcome here. So you'd want to use that. If we knew that it was going to be drier, or you wanted to anticipate or just kind of err on the safe side that it was going to be drier, you might want to use this forecast as the forecast to expect to come out of that stream gauge for the anticipated period. But yeah, Carl put it out perfectly. Thanks, Carl.
Who else has questions for Brian? Okay. Thank you, Brian. Really good presentation. Really helps us understand where we're sitting now after that big snowstorm that some of us at least got to experience here in the Front Range.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy, and thank you for the good questions.
All right, folks. So now we're onto the WATF Impact Task Force, water providers, updates and discussion, part of our agenda. Although if you're looking at our agenda, it looks like we're somewhat behind. We're pretty good on time because we did have that wildfire recovery update already. So we're pretty good on time. I don't want people to feel like we need to be super rushed because I think we're still going to end our meeting pretty close to what we planned. Thanks, Ben. So just a reminder about where we are in terms of the drought plan. This has not changed since we last met as the WATF. The drought plan is activated. We're having cabinet level regular meetings. The drought task force to monitor conditions, provide support as appropriate and possible at the state level. We also have the agricultural impact task force and municipal task force activated, again in accordance with the drought plan. So that hasn't changed. And I'll ask to Megan might have some additional thoughts you might want to add to what I was just going to try to provide as a summary of where we are as a state, or maybe Desi as well. So you guys please chime in. I also wanted to mention I'm aware that there's a group of Front Range water providers who are meeting on a regular basis. I think they're talking quite a bit about communications and other drought issues where they have some common interests. And also, I think there might be a related group of water providers talking, water providers statewide, talking about some of the same things with some regularity. And I thought there might be some folks on the call here who could provide an update and summary about what's going on with those separate regular meetings that are going on among water providers. Is there someone here who might be willing to volunteer a summary of what's happening with those groups?
Hi, Tracy. This is Megan. Can you hear me?
Yes, Megan, I hear you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I can jump in with a quick update. Essentially, there are still two task forces that are supporting the drought plan activation. The municipal water the municipal water task force is meeting once a month. The next meeting is April 7th, and that group is closely coordinating with those other two front range groups. There's a metro drought coordination group and a front range drought coordination group. Both of those are being co-led by Denver Water and Aurora Water. And so I'm working closely with those folks to make sure that we're complementing each other and not duplicating efforts. Obviously, the municipal water task force has a statewide scope in addition, in addition to just coordinating municipalities on the front range. The other group, the Agricultural Impact Task Force, has moved to a monthly meeting just to get ready for the agricultural season, and their meeting is actually this afternoon. So there's some information that will be coming out, but working to this is still in planning mode, but basically working to pull together a water plan workshop that will focus on bringing municipal representatives and agricultural representatives together. It's not directly related to drought plan activation, but is basically supporting long-term planning efforts to make sure while we have those task forces activated, we have some time for them to overlap and speak with one another. So more information on that. We haven't even picked a date yet, so it's still in the works, but we are trying to coordinate the task forces between each other as well as with the other external groups.
Thank you. Okay. With that, I think what I'll propose just to pretty efficiently go through municipal impact report is I think I'll try to call on municipal water provider representatives just to give a brief update of anything unique that you want to highlight for our group. And I want to do that just in the order that people put into the chat who they are and who they represent. And I know people may have come and gone and I might miss some folks. So I'll go through the chat first and call on folks. And folks who I know represent municipalities and water providers. And then once I do that, if I've missed you, I will ask you to, I'll just kind of ask for volunteers to add to what we've already heard. And then after that, I think we could talk about agricultural impacts that might be going on. I saw Joel's here, and probably anybody else who wants to chime in with an update. So I could do that. That would be great. So the first person I saw on the list is Brennan from Broomfield. Do you mind giving us an update? I see, Brennan, you're unmuted, but if you're talking, I don't hear you. I think not sure what might be happening, Brennan. Maybe we can move on and come back to you. Maybe we can sort out the audio there. The next person I saw on my list here was Katie from Colorado Springs Utilities.
Hey everyone, I'll keep it pretty short and sweet. I don't really have any updates past what I provided last month at the meeting. Right now, our system-wide reservoir storage is at about 70% of capacity, and our 2001 to 2020 average for that is 66%. So we're still about the same with 4% above average right now. And then this last storm really helped us out with our snowpack on north and south slopes. So that's pretty good. And that's about all I have. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Somehow, Swithin, I skipped you. Swithin, do you mind giving a report for Centennial?
No problem. So for reservoir storage, we are 58% of capacity, which is about only 70% of where we're normally at for this time of year. So it's been very concerning winter for me. We do continue pumping some of our Denver Basin wells to try to get ahead of what looks to be a dry summer and low reservoir storage for us. We did notice, especially in February, an increased demand on our system. We haven't quite teased out why that is, but it was about 10% above where we expected it to be for February. Maybe due to the dry conditions and people watering their trees, do not know. Very thankful for the moisture we got over the weekend, and hopeful it translates into more relaxed call regimen on the South Platte River.
Thanks, Swithin. Next person I have here is Isabel from City of Boulder.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, hear you well.
All right. So our reservoir system, Barker, is about 46% full. And then our upper watershed reservoirs are about 59% full, which is right on, right with the historical average. We're just wrapping up some work on Barker, so we'll be able to, once we get some more flows in the creeks at runoff, we'll be able to start filling up Barker again after the maintenance. We reported, I think it was 2.2 inches of SWE up in our watershed, so we're pretty happy with this last storm. Although, you know, we're still hoping to get a bunch more snow in preparation for the summer. But yeah, things are looking good. I think demands are around average at this time. So that's the update from here.
Thank you. How about Emily from Northern Water?
Hi, everyone. For our reservoir storage, Carter Lake is near full. Horsetooth is at 68% full. Granby is 69% full, and Willow Creek is 75% full. We think we'll have room to pump Windy Gap if it comes into priority. And we'll be monitoring water quality post-fire and making adjustments if there's concern throughout the runoff period. Like everyone else, we're thankful for the moisture from the recent storm and hope we get some more on the west slope as well. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm just going down the list. I do see Alden from Rio Blanco Water Conservancy District is on, and Alden, you know, you guys are not direct water providers that I'm aware of, but I just wonder if you'd want to update us on the conditions you're seeing on the ground on the very western side of the state in Rio Blanco County, or if you have anything you want to report. We often are dominated by our metro area water providers, and it's nice to hear what's going on the west slope when we get a chance.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here. We are not a water provider yet, but we actually are in the midst of setting up a rural water system here and becoming a public water supply, because groundwater is becoming, and surface water continues to become a pretty scarce item here in this part of the world, as many may or may not be aware. Right now, we did have some wonderful moisture this past weekend, but our soil moisture is so depleted, there's not one mud puddle around. We look outside, there is no more snow on the ground because we didn't have a lot of snow. There was some snow that did fall in the high country, and for us, that's very important because when we look at the Yampa White Reservoir storage capacity, I think it's important to note that that's for the Yampa River, because the White River doesn't have any surface water storage. So we rely heavily upon that snowpack and other precipitation as it comes, and that's all we have. So so we rely a lot upon our alluvial storage here, our aquifers that we have that are recharged from ag. So we have been monitoring our water releases, or the water passes through Kenny Reservoir that we have for hydropower. And in December, we actually had the second lowest value that really mirrored what we had in 2002. And then to January, actually, it was about the third lowest in history of what I've seen in our 40 years here on the White River for that hydropower. And then February was right there at number 2 to number 3. So we're seeing values that are really close to what we had from 2002 and 2018, and values that are much lower than what we went through in 2012. So our hydrograph isn't setting up to be great, and what moisture is happening is being consumed by our soil, which is good. I mean, we got to fill that up as well. So, but our stream flows have maintained considerably lower than what they have been in the past. So we're doing the best we can, just kind of holding on and looking to where we can maybe do some efficiencies, do some drought planning. I know Rangeley just went ahead and just approved their drought plan here this next week or this past week, anticipation for some other shortages coming. So since we don't have a reservoir to release water from, we just have to do some restrictions. So, and ag is getting set up as well. So, and last year, late last fall, somebody put a dozer in the river and actually built a coffer dam that went across a small dam at Rangeley. So they dammed up the whole river, which was the first time we've ever seen that. So we're holding our breath. We're hoping for Mother Nature to be very cooperative and even sympathetic to us and give us some moisture that's much needed. So thank you for the opportunity, though, to speak. And this is a great group to listen in on. Thank you.
Thanks, Alden. We appreciate hearing from you. And then April typed here in the chat that she's happy to provide an update for municipalities in the Roaring Fork watershed. So if you're ready now, April, it'd be nice to hear that as well.
Hi, I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Yep, hear you good. Thank you.
Okay. So I work with the municipalities in the Roaring Fork watershed on our regional water efficiency plans and all of their individual plans. And we have been convening since the beginning of the year, anticipating this drought for the summer and discussing how we as a watershed can message to our constituents and residents and visitors alike behavior changes that would be helpful and in this what's going to be a very dry year. While you saw from the presentation that our SWE has increased from the storms in March, our stream flow forecasts are still extremely low. I think that the presentation showed about 66% of average is expected on the Roaring Fork River in Glenwood Springs. And so our municipal water providers are significantly concerned. We also do not have storage, and our water sources are from surface runoff or from alluvial wells. And given the back-to-back conditions of dry years, there is some significant concern about being able to provide water this year. Particularly in the city of Aspen, we remain in a stage 2 water restriction that we've been in for over 12 months now. So as a group, we are trying to message the idea to reconsider landscaping for the year. So we're talking to the municipalities about any large projects that may be constructed this year to try to put off any of those landscaping or revegetation efforts into the next year. We're talking to residents about reconsidering how they plant and irrigate their lawns for the year ahead, trying to get ahead of a planting season. Other big concerns are that in dry years like this, the Roaring Fork River in Aspen and the Crystal River in Carbondale run nearly completely dry. Less than 5 CFS is what we're anticipating. That can have significant impacts economically for our recreation businesses, such as fishing and rafting, So we're trying to prepare our communities for that. We also have extreme challenges with temperature in the river, which creates even further fishing restrictions in the lower Roaring Fork, which could affect the economy of Glenwood Springs and Carbondale, those more downstream communities. And then as well, our biggest concern in Glenwood Springs is this fire recovery effort. They're switching their water sources this year and trying to quickly make their drinking water capacity portfolio extended, and then also their ability to treat that water. So lots of efforts happening in Glenwood Springs, and I will say that because of the fire in Glenwood Canyon, that we expect some water quality impacts downstream from that. There are a couple of communities that pull their drinking water straight off of the Colorado River, and with low water years and the high likelihood of water quality impacts from the fire, I think that would be of significant concern for those communities, such as I believe it's like Silt that's pulling, maybe Silt and DeBeck that pull straight from the Colorado River for their drinking water source. So lots of concerns over here. We're stressed, and we're stressed like everybody else is from what has already been hard years. And so to talk to a community about being stressed a little more about drought and wildfire on the top of everything else is making for hard conversations, but I'm still happy to live in the West Slope.
Thank you, April. It's a really good summary. Appreciate it. Just going back to my list, and I've noticed that some folks who had signed in may have dropped off. So if I think you've dropped off, I will skip you. I see Andrew, City of Greeley.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
I hear ya.
Cool. Not too much to update. We were pretty ecstatic about this recent storm. Right now, our storage reservoirs are sitting at about 55%. We are projecting them to fill around 80 to 90%. We're not planning for any watering restrictions at this time. Looking at some of the snowtail sites at our high mountain reservoirs, the snowpack actually doubled up there. There was about 2.5 inches of SWE, but the snowpack doubled. So it was kind of neat to see that graph. And the only thing we're kind of monitoring now is fire mitigation and response to any water quality concerns during runoff from the Cameron Peak fire this spring. So those are the factors we're looking at right now.
Thank you. The next person I have on my list is Kaylee from Grand County. I'm not sure, Kaylee, if you want to provide any type of report. I don't think you're a water provider, but maybe you want to mention conditions. If not, you don't need to.
Hi, I don't have any updates.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. We're happy you're here. The next person, I see Joel Benson from Buena Vista. Maybe Joel has left because I don't see you on the list of people anymore. How about Zach from the town of Silverthorne? Okay, you may have left as well. I saw John from Thornton here. Now I'm just going back to my list of people who I maybe don't have you from the chat. So John, do you have an update for us?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I hear ya.
Okay, yeah, I do have an update. Production is about year-to-date production is about 3% below last year, which I think reflects the storminess in February and March, especially March. Our storage is sitting at 67% of capacity, which is pretty much normal. We're gearing up for runoff as usual this time of year. Stanley Lake is 71.3% of capacity. And after the beautiful snowfall, we're more optimistic that Stanley Lake will fill this year. And also the beautiful snowfall has caused us to sit back and wait for the next water supply outlook report and also today's drought monitor as far as imposing watering restrictions for this year. And that's my report.
Thank you. All right, guys. Let's see. Who else have I got here? I think I saw Nathan. Nathan, did you want to do a report? And then I'm also looking.
Sure. Nathan from Denver Water. Our storage, we are 76% full. Typical for this time of year, we'd be 79% full, so we're not that far off. Pretty good shape storage wise. Year to date, our demands have been 93% of average. So we've seen some below average demands, and the recent storm, is definitely giving our system a boost, especially some of our lower elevation reservoirs. And we're continuing to monitor conditions and hoping for more precipitation in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. How about Brian Fitzpatrick?
Hi, Brian from City of Aurora. Our demand has been about 5% below average. Obviously, cold temperatures in February and then the storm. Storage, we are at 61% of capacity, and normally this time of year would be about 63. So we're right in the ballpark. Yeah, the storm was a big boost, and our focus right now is we need to try to get Spitty Mountain Reservoir, which is our main regulatory reservoir, closer to full. It's about at half capacity right now. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, folks. If there's other water providers who I've missed, I will just ask you to please unmute yourself to provide an update if you'd like, or to put any kind of information in the chat. I also saw Scott Hummer on DWR staff from the Yampa Basin. If you wanted to just mention what conditions are like there. I'm just going to pause and see if anyone else wants to chime in regarding conditions, and then I would like to move along to Joel.
Tracy, this is Scott.
Hi, Scott.
I can say that probably most folks along the Front Range actually have more snow in their front yards than I do. I can actually see grass. I have bare ground. So the upper Yampa headwaters are, we're below average. Soil moisture is a concern for most folks. Alden stated it well for our particular region. It's going to be, most folks are anticipating an early runoff and having to tap into almost all of their storage capacity.
Thank you, Scott. Anybody else? Please don't be shy. All right. How about Joel? Do you have any ag impacts or report you'd like to give?
Well, I guess, can you hear me okay, Tracy?
Yes, it's great.
Just not much. It was a beautiful storm, very reminiscent of 2003 out here, where we were predicted to have 2 to 3 feet of snow at times, depending upon who you listen to. Ended up, most of us out here had probably closer to 6 inches or less, but very wet. I had about 5 inches of snow on the ground at the end, and 2.4 inches of water equivalent in the rain gauge. So it was nice and wet and sloppy. So very nice. This storm has been about 75 to 85% of our precipitation since October 1 of what we've got collected. So this has been very nice. Winter, everything's kind of still just breaking dormancy for the winter wheat crop. It was starting to green up last week that I saw. So this would be a nice little drink for it. It's still going to make some dent in topsoil moisture, and that's being reported. I am seeing a slight increase in subsoil moisture according to what the Colorado Crop Progress report said, but I question if we had enough to get it very deep into the subsoil compared to how dry we were entering into the winter. Other than that, I think last time I looked at the Plains irrigation reservoirs, they were about average. I would assume if they can, they will probably be opening up and doing their top off here very soon with the runoff of the snow coming off the Front Range and the concrete. So we'll see where we're at here in another month and a half or so.
All right. Anybody else? Please speak up.
Can I ask Joel a question?
Please.
I had questions from others in the central region if there was any livestock impacts from the storm.
Yeah, there were. I heard of some people losing calves. So how wet and how heavy it was. Unfortunately, they had plenty of update to move livestock in, but I know that some said their calves got covered up a little bit and the cows trampled them because of how they tend to bunch during these type of storms. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there is some livestock impact, but for the most part, other than a little bit of death loss and some young stock, I haven't heard anything of big losses, so we're okay there.
Okay, thanks.
All right, anything else? All right. With that, let's move on. The next couple of agenda items we have are the general flood updates. We covered the wildfire recovery already, and then we'll do the flood threat bulletin. So is this Kevin Hauk? Are you on?
Okay, I am here, and I have to apologize to everybody. I'm in a car with a lot of background noise, so hopefully that's not too obnoxious while I'm talking. I don't actually have a lot of updates to make. I'll probably say the same things that I generally say every year. This is the time of year when we start looking ahead to flood season, and everything that we do is related to probabilities. So while we can look at snowpack and the potential for snowmelt flooding, which is actually surprisingly rare in most of Colorado, most of what we are anticipating every year are going to be rainfall-induced floods created by heavy rainfall. And I think as it's easy for most people to accept, it's very hard to predict these events with any kind of accuracy more than a couple weeks in advance. So what we look for are the seasonal trends. And as Becky mentioned earlier, the seasonal outlook for total precipitation is expected to be a little light. Now, when it comes to flood events, we are looking at what happens during a particular individual event, and that can be hard to predict ahead of time. So we will remain vigilant throughout the flood season, but I would say based on the seasonal forecast that we have received and the indications that are present, I would say that the general threat for rainfall flooding is probably at least lower than it is in an average year. It's no guarantee that it won't happen, and of course no guarantee that it will, but I think that the threat is reduced to a certain extent. One area that we are very much paying attention to are going to be the areas of post-wildfire flooding. As you all know, and as we talked about earlier in the meeting, we had our largest wildfire season ever in 2020. So there's a lot of new burn scars, many of which haven't even been tested by a rainfall event at all since they ignited. And many of these areas are upstream of both population as well as critical water resources. So it's going to be an area that we really have to watch closely. And I anticipate probably over the course of the season, we are going to have some problems in these areas. And we will maintain a vigilant attention to that. Otherwise, we have a presentation later regarding the flood threat bulletin that Dewberry will be presenting, and that is the CWCB's best tool in looking ahead to potential threats in regards to any kind of flood threats that exist, but also with special attention this year to the burn area threats themselves. So I will wait and let Dewberry talk about that. And I think with that, I'm going to stop talking and take questions. And I see that Greg Hansen from the National Weather Service wants to speak as well. So I'm going to mute, but if anybody has any questions for me, I'd be happy to talk.
Anybody have questions for Kevin? Okay, I'm not hearing any at the moment. Why don't we turn it over to Greg? Greg, thanks for joining us.
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me. This is Greg Hansen with the National Weather Service office in Boulder. Yeah, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit. Thanks, Kevin, for bringing up the burn scars. That's kind of what we're all about in our area anyway for this year, are the burn scar flood threats. So we've been working a lot with emergency managers, communities, the recovery groups to try to make sure we're all on the same page. Looking forward to whatever extra rain gauges and monitoring we get in those burn scars. We've got good radar coverage for like the Calwood, Cameron Peak fires. You know, they're on the eastern slopes and the radar shoots into those pretty well. West of the divide, the most of the East Troublesome fire, Williams Fork, the radar coverage isn't as good because we're higher up in the mountains. The mountains block the lowest beams of the radar. So we're going to be relying a lot on those expanding rain gauge networks up there. So I put a link in chat, got a little web page put up with some burn scar information. Please feel free to, if you've got comments on it, to get in touch with me. On the far right, under the resources tab, there's some like social media infographics that people can push out. So as we get on into the summer season here and start to test those burn scars, you know, that's some social media that we hope everyone would help us push that out. It's not going to take much. Our preliminary estimates based on what the post-fire teams, the BEAR teams have done, and the USGS debris flow experts, you know, we're looking at maybe 1/3 of an inch in 15 minutes, maybe a little bit more, and certainly less than an inch an hour, like 3/4 of an inch in an hour are kind of our preliminary thresholds for those flash flood warnings for that. And those numbers are subject to change. You know, that's based on what the USGS has told us about debris flows and our forecast experience with past fires. So we do need to test them out and get some rain on those fires to see what's going to happen. Hopefully we don't have a real test with it, but that's about all I've got, and I'm happy to answer any questions too.
Oh, and this is Tristay at the Weather Service as well. I just wanted to thank Colorado Water Conservation Board for contracting to do that modeling for the burn scars, the Ingenuity Engineering that was discussed earlier. Sorry, I was in another meeting. But providing their modeling for the burn scars has been very helpful. Meeting with Gerald Blackler and getting his modeling expertise on Calwood, East Troublesome, Cameron Peak, and Williams Fork burn scars has been most helpful, as well as him being on our meetings. And I know county officials have also been utilizing those services to help them a lot. So just wanted to thank the Colorado Water Conservation Board.
Sounds good. Any other questions?
Greg, do you know of how the ground burn scars respond to the snow that's accumulating on it? Like in Larimer County, where we got like 5 inches of water in the snow, how that will respond to that? Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Yeah, so it's my understanding, and Tristay, jump in if correct me if I'm wrong, but the snow melt tends to not be an issue with burn scar flooding. The snow melt rates are slow enough that you know, the water comes off pretty easily. You know, the hydrophobic soils are still there, so they're not going to absorb as much, but the actual, you know, rate of snow melt isn't on par with that, you know, 1/3 of an inch an hour or 1/3 of an inch in 15 minutes rainfall rate. You know, it's much slower than that. We think we will see, you know, some pretty dirty water, especially if we, you know, we get some warm temperatures and get the melt going. You know, that'll start to wash off that first layer of ash. So water quality will certainly be bad. Probably a higher amount of runoff than we would see ordinarily, but that should still remain in the stream channel. You know, part of the deal too is with the snow melt, especially in the terrain. You know, we may be warmer and melting the snow at the lower elevations, but the snow up higher in the basin is still intact. So that process works to our benefit. It's kind of a layered elevation-based approach as that snow melts as well.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Okay, let's move on to our flood threat bulletin, please.
Hi, Tracy. This is David Sutley with Dewberry. I'm going to request sharing privileges so I can get our deck up on the screen. All righty. Looks like it's coming through now. I'll pop it up.
Yep, I see it.
Perfect. Okay. So Kevin made a good segue for this project that we've been providing to CWCB for the last 5 years, and we're excited about some of the upgrades as he alluded to this year. Again, my name is David. I'm a hydrologist and project manager at Dewberry here in Denver, and we've also got Dana McGlone from Hydromet Consulting on the line as well. She's our lead meteorologist and forecaster for the season, as well as been supporting across this project for the last 4 years. So given the amount of time we have, I kind of wanted to get through a couple of overview slides for the group here. To kind of introduce the flood threat bulletin again. I'm going to go ahead and drop a link to it in the chat. So if folks want to pull it up and sort of explore around while I'm going through this, it may be helpful. So again, really the objective here is really to increase the lead time for those heavy rainfall events during the warm and monsoon seasons, during the summer months. Because as Kevin alluded to, I mean, the heavy precip is really the driving factor of a lot of our large flooding events in the state. And since we have such a wide variety of geographic conditions, we want to really provide some good context and good forecasts leading up to those and during those events. The products that we provide really inform the user of heavy rainfall in the context of the timing of it, location, intensity, and confidence and overall nature of the threat. So a quick overview of the 3 main products that are issued in the flood threat bulletin would be the daily forecast. So really by 11 a.m. daily, we take a look at the flood risk over a 24-hour period and provide that categorization from low up to high impact, and using that color scale on the right in a blog format. So that can be tracked easily over multi-day events, and we can start to see and communicate impacts out more seamlessly through the social media platforms that we update. The second area is the statewide precipitation map that takes a look backwards over the past 72 hours to sort of quantify past rainfall totals, flooding that has occurred, and really some of those antecedent conditions going into the threat forecast over the next 24 hours. And finally, a more longer term outlook would be the FTO, issued on 2 days a week, is really that looking out over the next 15 days for the threat of heavy precipitation, rapid snow belt, and even any drought development as well. So just to recap some of the upgrades incorporated last year, we began to forecast as part of the main forecast daily burn area impacts, given some of the burn areas that were in place during 2020 forecast season last year. Obviously, based on the fire season last year, we have quite a few burn areas that have not seen an event yet, and I'll get to that in a little bit. We also made some enhancements to the state precipitation map as well. Those enhancements included more bias correction in the products that we included for those 72-hour totals, understanding the limitations that radar has in some of the orographic effects. We wanted to make sure that we did include those bias corrections in there, so we have a more accurate understanding of what has occurred and what rain fell on the ground over that look back period. And then finally, one of the really cool crowdsourcing features that we implemented on the site was the report a flood tab. So it really allows a user that has some understanding of floods that's occurring to kind of capture that locations, dates, types. If a user has access to some co-op rain gauge data or even local data, they can include sort of an estimate of the rainfall they see occurring and any additional details that can help the forecaster and also help emergency services really understand what's occurring on the ground. And this is the area that really wanted to focus on today, was those upgrades for 2021, really focusing on those high priority burn areas that Kevin alluded to earlier. We certainly have identified sort of 6 top priorities this season, including Pine Gulch, Grizzly Creek, East Troublesome, Cameron Peak, Cowwood, and Spring Creek. Has been in place since 2018. So we really wanted to take a look and really separate those out from the normal daily forecast so that we can create more concise forecast data dissemination to get to users that need them quickly. So we anticipate providing a table format for our 6 highest priorities and include multivariable estimates of the antecedent conditions going into the forecast for the day. Those can include, others are planned to include some of a maximum intensity threshold and also a look back at the 24-hour rain totals. For those intensities, we definitely will begin to use, at the beginning of the season, use a more conservative or lower thresholds for those new 2020 burn areas, since they really haven't been hit by an event yet. And then for the Spring Creek area, we'll look to kind of use our knowledge last year and come up with a vetted intensity threshold that will form our forecast for that burn area. Another piece of information that will be included for 2021 was really that the lead up of the percentage of the burn area that has been previously affected from rainfall for that 24-hour period previous, and also an assessment of whether flooding has occurred in the past 24 hours. We found a good resource in leveraging the local storm reports, and also are hoping to leverage any temporary rain gauge information that is set up in some of these burn areas to really provide us a good understanding of where flooding has occurred, so that can go into assessing that threat forecast for the next 24 hours. That table will be put out daily again in a blog style format, separate from the other daily forecasts, so that users can quickly go to that if their most concern is really dealing with the impacts in those burn areas. We'd certainly see a lot of collaboration and coordination needed leading up to the forecast season and during the season with the Weather Service. So Greg, good to hear everything that's going in, and excited to learn more about the modeling that has been done in some of those burn areas as well. Again, we'll be updating our Facebook and Twitter accounts daily with forecast information at the CO Flood Updates handle, and also folks can kind of follow and subscribe to those hashtags on the right. So I wanted to keep this pretty brief and open it up to questions now, given how much time we have left for today. Again, there's the website. Obviously, there's a daily email service for subscribers. And again, there's our Twitter and Facebook handles, and my email is listed there for any project-specific questions, any questions on the products. Between Dana and myself, we can field any questions now for the group as we are ramping up for the season that starts here in May and goes through the end of September.
And this is Kevin Hauk again. I just wanted to reiterate what David just said, which is this will run from May 1st through September 30th, our primary flood season. And one other thing I just wanted to remind everybody is that this is just a daily look ahead for what to expect that day. This is not updated in real time for storms as they are occurring. So in the sense of the warning type processes, you're still going to want to pay attention to the Weather Service as they issue products as events are occurring, whether it's severe weather or whether it's flood risks.
Precisely, Kevin. Thanks for that clarification.
Any questions? Okay. All right. Well, that was our last presentation for the day. Ben, if I could trouble you to scroll down, that'll show us what our next meeting date is. Our next meeting will not be the combined flood task force, water availability task force. It'll just be the water availability, so it'll be a little shorter. So April 20th, 9:30 a.m. Thank you, everybody, for the good presentations and input. We'll talk to you next month.
I just had a question for the weather and climate folks on call.
Okay.
And I noticed when I was scooping my driveway this past weekend of the beautiful snow we had, there was a noticeable amount of dust in there, kind of a tannish brown. And I was just wondering if anybody knew whose topsoil we were receiving along with our beautiful snow this weekend. Was it eastern Colorado farmland or southwest Four Corners area? Anybody know?
Yeah, I saw a few actual news media reports that were saying that that was dust from Mexico. I have not validated that.
Okay.
New Mexico.
Oh, New Mexico. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Yeah, just a
Thank you, Becky.
curiosity question. So.
Anything else? Well, thank you all. Good meeting. I appreciate it.
Thanks.